we're working with don't put them out of your heart. And the them can be anybody who causes us to contract, to get protective. And that could be a personal relationship. It could be somebody that we see in a store or something, someone we see on social media. I think many of us had a lot of work over the last few years, especially when Donald Trump was running for president and then was president, to work with these really complex and really kind of obvious ways that our hearts shut down. And I'm not in any way saying that we're wrong to have discernment, that everybody should be just kind of equally in our heart. What we are looking at is how can we work skillfully with this? And even when somebody is clearly not in alignment with our values, how can we be clear about that at the same time as we're not closing our heart down and damaging ourselves through what we're doing around that? We have this push-pull. It would be a lot easier to feel safe if we didn't need other people. So part of this is the way our nervous systems are wired, is that especially human children need a couple of decades of connection and into our adult life too. But our brain doesn't fully develop even until we're in our mid to late 20s. So we really need consistent, attuned, empathetic caregivers in order to have the best chance of developing a healthy nervous system and brain. We also have, in addition to wanting that connection and needing that for survival, we also have that natural inclination to protect ourselves from attack or exploitation. And part of this, Dr. Rick Hanson, a neuropsychologist, was talking about this, how closing off doesn't make us feel good. It makes us feel heavy. It primes us to be more tense and reactive. Then we get into trouble, especially if we have a freeze response or a fight response. Then if we have a fight response, we might lash out and say something. If we have a freeze response, it tends to take a little bit longer time to do the damage, but we lose authenticity. And whatever it is that's going on between us and other people, our own hard-heartedness, our own struggle with maintaining equilibrium can make the situation with the other person more intense. Let's pause here for a moment. What does an open heart feel like? So physically in our chest, what does it feel like? And you can bring someone to mind if you like, or a pet or something, an experience. What does it feel like when we feel open-hearted? The warmth, softness, there's an expansiveness. We can feel that in our whole body, although the most intense part of that tends to be in our chest area. And what does that feel like emotionally? We have more empathy, compassion, and being on an even keel, we're not thrown around by the winds of emotion as much. We have more stability in the polyvagal system. We'd call that being in ventral vagal. We feel trust, connection. We're open-hearted. And then the thoughts that we might have, we have a different kind of view on things. There tends to be less fear, less ruminating, less catastrophic thinking. And in the yoga meditation practice, there's a practice of the 4 right attitudes. Buddhism also has something very similar, and as do many other systems of philosophy like that. And it's around wishing other people well, working with the natural kind of inclinations towards, well, why do they have that? Why do they get that ease when they're doing these bad things maybe, or why don't I have that? So we have all of these nervous system, primitive, kind of tribal protectiveness, mammal body protectiveness. And then how do we work with that? So let's take this moment to acknowledge that all of that is just common, it's normal. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with us. And then again, to feel into this open-heartedness. The sky stays open to all clouds, and it isn't harmed by even the stormiest ones. And that's something that would be a very advanced practice if we could actually do that. Because what we try to do is stay away from the storms and open into the sunny skies. And of course, that's why wouldn't we? Of course, that's a good thing, good idea. But to get to a point in what we're working with where we can stay more present even with the stormy ones and not take that quite so seriously. So Gandhi is an example of someone who exemplified this. He didn't put people out of his heart. And there's a book called Gandhi the Man where they describe some of his interactions with people. And he was describing an interaction with one of the British leaders. And he said, you need to be, Britain needs to be out of India. You don't belong here. The social media, that wasn't any social media at the time, but the verbiage that they would use is we're helping you, the poor, uncivilized Indians. And here comes Britain, and we're out to help everyone. And so he's saying, you need to be out of here because of that. It's not right. This is unjust. And we are going to, in a nonviolent way, we are going to get you out of here, which they did. But he also said, and it's stuck with me. I've thought about this so many times since I read that book, probably 25 years ago, 30 years ago, is that it's also harming you to be doing this. So that's such an example for me of how he didn't make them into the bad guys. He was really clear of the harm that was being done. But he also said, by allowing you to come here and stay here, all of these young idealistic soldiers come over here to save us. So that part of the problem, we don't need saving. But also, it's harming them. I see them becoming more cynical, more disrespectful, more contempt for us as they're over here for a year or two. And so let's be clear about the damage on both sides. You don't belong here, and we are going to make sure you leave. And I'm not doing it with hatred in my heart. It's also with respect for you and a clarity that Gandhi had. The Dalai Lama is another example. Michelle Obama is another example of someone who's really clear and open-hearted. One of the underlying factors, I think, of hardening our hearts is the shame that we might feel from the experience that we have with certain people. So that could be in part that we stay in relationships longer than is healthy for us. Or maybe we really regret that we didn't stand up for someone else who was being harmed. We might have been causing some of the harm, lashing out, for instance, if you were in a fight response. So the idea and maybe we could just sit with this for a minute or two, is whatever we contributed to this, like we might have contributed by not addressing the situation earlier. And that's the example from Gandhi is really illustrating that. Like he spoke up and he said, this is wrong, this is harmful, this is what's actually going on. He told the truth. But that's not something we can always do because we can't always see it, or we don't have the power or the agency. We're often overwhelmed. Michael Singer talks about the samskaras, the kind of the scars of our experience that block our hearts. So as we're working with these kinds of things, not to sell ourselves out by thinking, well, I had a part in that. For me, in relationship, often I'm the one who's in freeze. And I feel like, well, I should have spoken up earlier. I feel like I was contributing in that way. So when we work with that with kindness and compassion for ourselves, I'm able to now look at that and go, there are some things I regret about that. I can see how I contributed to what was going on in that relationship, the breakdown in the relationship. And I can have compassion for myself that that's the situation. Instead of staying in the situation, we don't have to stay in an unhealthy situation, and we don't have to close our heart. That's the practice. That's the advanced practice. How can I stay open-hearted and feel that compassion starting with ourselves? So we can keep the lesson from that, do things differently going forward, and we can let go of the shame. Let's sit with that for a minute. What's happening in your body as you're thinking about that and feeling into that? When you know better, do better. from Maya Angelou. So for the inquiry, let's bring to mind somebody who causes us to shut down. So it could be maybe not work with a 10 out of 10 with a short inquiry like this, but it is something we can come back to. So before we even get into the inquiry, notice the safety in this moment. You could look around the room. You could hold your own hand. You could do some tapping on your forehead. Feel your feet, your seat. So we have all those grounding and orienting tools that we use that help us to remain as a witness. When you bring to mind someone who causes that contraction in your heart, you might notice that your physical chest muscles, your back gets tight. We could take a breath, if you're holding your breath, especially. There's two types of inquiries. One is just an inquiry statement, and the other is a reverse inquiry. Let's start with the inquiry. I feel neutral towards this person. And notice what comes up when you say that. I understand the situation. I have a pretty good sense of what went on. I don't want them in my life anymore, and I don't have to put them out of my heart. I feel neutral. Not going to be 100% true. We'll stay with this for several minutes so you have a chance to work with regulating. So, coming back into awareness if you get dragged off into a memory or something, which would be very common, just notice that that's happened. Come back into your body and your breath. What are the thoughts, the emotions, the memories that are coming up? And maybe feeling neutral isn't even something that you are interested in. No, I feel contempt for that person, or I hate that person, or whatever it might be. So we're not trying to lie to ourselves. We're just noticing when I say that, what does it feel like in my body? What are the thoughts that come up? If you can, keep your body softer. Relax your chest, your upper back. Let your breath be smooth. And we're not in any way saying we have to love the person. We certainly aren't saying we have to love what they've done. So the reverse inquiry might be something like, I feel no attachment to this person. Like, I really don't care. They don't have the power anymore to get me going. I don't want them in my life anymore. I don't want to make it right. I don't want to have my day in court with this person. And I don't feel any aversion towards this person. This was the situation. I see it clearly. I'm free from it. And the reverse inquiry are statements that we know are not completely true. And what's the brain and unconscious mind telling us when we say that? So if we say, I feel no aversion towards this person, and your mind's like, yeah, that's not even true, a little bit. I hate them because of this and this, or whatever it might be. But just to come back to witnessing. So when we harden our heart to someone or put them out of our heart, doesn't necessarily mean we don't have any feelings about it. We might have a lot of feelings about it. And we're allowing those feelings to be here so that we can feel them. Continue to be aware of your breath. Let your body soften. We might have to do that several times a minute when we're working with something that makes us stiffen up. If it gets too intense, you could do some tapping on your forehead. You could stop for a moment, step back. Practice holding this in our heart, being open-hearted, letting ourselves feel what's here. Does not mean we feel sympathy towards them or anything in particular towards them. We're working with what's happening in our own heart. In a moment, we're going to complete the inquiry, and this is something that would be really helpful to do longer and come back to many times, especially if we find that we have a lot of compulsive thinking about somebody or about a situation. I've had that happen many times. Sometimes it can kind of come up and really grab onto us for a while, and then it will recede. It gets, we get some distance from it. But having these kind of specific times when we inquire into things can be really helpful, just to see what is it that still got me hooked, and then can I work with that? So hold yourself for a moment with some compassion, loving kindness. Put your hand on your heart if you want. Soften the muscles of your neck and shoulders, the back of your body, the front of your chest. And when we offer ourselves loving kindness, what we're saying is, this is a hard situation to be in. And I wish I had done things differently, or I wish the situation was different. Might be here. It often is. And there's a recognition that I don't have to be perfect, even if I've contributed to a situation that's difficult. I could still bring my own self into a state of connection. I could be kind with myself. Let yourself feel that. Don't put yourself out of your heart.